Imagine living in a world where every movement is watched, every word is recorded, every facial expression can betray you. You wake up in a cold apartment, eat tasteless food, go to a job you hate, and spend your days rewriting history for a government that insists it has never made a mistake. You are not allowed to question what you are told. You are not even allowed to remember that things were once different. And the most terrifying part is not that the government controls what you do. It is that, eventually, it may control what you believe. This is the world of George Orwell's 1984. A novel about surveillance, propaganda, political power, psychological destruction, and the frightening possibility that truth itself can be erased. But 1984 is not simply a warning about cameras watching us. It is a story about a government trying to enter the last private place a human being possesses: the mind. Our story begins in Oceania, one of 3 enormous superstates that divide the world. Oceania is ruled by the Party, an all-powerful political organization led by the mysterious figure known as Big Brother. His face appears everywhere, on posters, on walls, on television screens. Citizens are constantly reminded that Big Brother is watching them. Whether Big Brother is a real person hardly matters. He has become something larger than a man. He is the face of authority, the image of protection, and the symbol of absolute control. The main character, Winston Smith, is a thin, exhausted, 39-year-old man living in London. But this is not the London we know. The city is decaying, buildings are collapsing, food is scarce. Everything smells of boiled cabbage, cheap alcohol, and neglect. The Party claims life is improving every year. Winston can see with his own eyes that this is a lie. He works at the Ministry of Truth. Despite its name, the ministry does not protect truth. It manufactures it. Winston's job is to alter old newspapers so that the Party always appears correct. When the government predicts that production will increase and it later decreases, Winston changes the original prediction. When a public official disappears, Winston removes every reference proving that person ever existed. When Oceania changes enemies in the middle of a war, every historical record is rewritten to show that the new enemy has always been the enemy. Old evidence is destroyed, new evidence is created. The lie becomes the official record, and once every document agrees with the lie, the Party asks a simple question: how can anyone prove that another truth ever existed? Winston participates in this system every day. But secretly, he hates it. He remembers small fragments of the past. He remembers a time before the Party had complete control. He remembers his mother. He remembers feelings that no longer seem to exist in his world. Love without permission, loyalty without fear, and grief that belongs to the individual rather than the state. One day, Winston commits an act that could lead to his death. He buys a diary. He sits in a corner of his apartment where the telescreen cannot fully see him and begins to write. The telescreen is a device found in nearly every room. It broadcasts propaganda, but it also watches and listens. Citizens never know when they are being observed. This uncertainty is deliberate. A prisoner does not need to be watched every second if he believes he could be watched at any second. Winston writes his hatred for Big Brother. The words are simple, but their meaning is enormous. For the first time, he creates a private truth, something the Party did not approve, something that belongs only to him. In Oceania, this is called thought crime. The Party does not merely punish illegal actions, it punishes forbidden thoughts. A person can be arrested because of a nervous movement, a careless expression, or a word spoken while asleep. Children are encouraged to spy on their parents. Neighbors report one another. Trust becomes dangerous. Privacy becomes evidence of guilt, and even silence can be suspicious. At work, Winston notices a young woman named Julia. At first, he believes she is spying on him. She wears the uniform of the Junior Anti-Sex League, an organization that promotes emotional discipline and loyalty to the Party. Then, one day, she secretly places a note in his hand. The message says that she loves him. Winston is stunned. In this world, genuine love is an act of rebellion. The Party wants to control every strong emotion. It does not want citizens to give their deepest loyalty to a husband, a wife, a child, or a lover. All passion must eventually be redirected toward Big Brother. Winston and Julia begin meeting in secret. Their relationship is not merely romantic, it is political. Even when they do not openly discuss politics, every kiss is a refusal. Every private conversation is resistance. Every moment of pleasure proves that the party does not completely own them. Julia's rebellion is practical. She does not care as much about history or political theory. She breaks rules because she wants to experience life. She wants pleasure, freedom, and control over her own body. Winston's rebellion is more intellectual. He wants to understand how the system began. He wants proof that the party is lying. Most of all, he wants to know whether truth can continue to exist, even when every person is forced to deny it. They rent a small room above an antique shop. The room has no visible telescreen. For a brief time, it becomes their private world. There is an old bed, a small stove, a picture on the wall, a glass paperweight containing a piece of coral. To Winston, the paperweight represents something fragile and beautiful from the past. A tiny world protected inside glass. He imagines that he and Julia are inside it, safe from the party. But safety in 1984 is almost always an illusion. Winston also becomes fascinated by a powerful party official named O'Brien. O'Brien appears intelligent, controlled, and strangely sympathetic. Winston convinces himself that O'Brien secretly opposes the government. Eventually, O'Brien invites Winston and Julia to his home. There, he claims to be part of an underground resistance led by the party's greatest enemy, Emmanuel Goldstein. Winston believes he has finally found others who understand the truth. He and Julia promise that they are willing to commit terrible acts against the party. But when they are asked whether they are willing to separate permanently, Julia immediately refuses. That moment matters. Their rebellion may be political, but its emotional center is their connection to one another. They may be willing to risk their lives. They are not willing to surrender the one thing that makes those lives meaningful. Winston receives a forbidden political book explaining how the party maintains power. The answer is brutally simple. The party does not seek power to build a better world. It seeks power because power is the goal. War keeps society poor and frightened. Scarcity prevents ordinary people from becoming independent. Propaganda keeps them confused. And constant enemies give them somewhere to direct their anger. The government does not need to make people happy. It only needs to make them weak, isolated, and unable to imagine an alternative. Then the illusion collapses. The picture in the rented room falls from the wall. A hidden telescreen is revealed. The room was never private. The antique shop owner was never harmless. Winston and Julia have been watched. The thought police enter. The glass paperweight shatters. Their tiny protected world is destroyed in seconds. Winston is taken to the Ministry of Love. Again, the name means the opposite of its true purpose. The Ministry of Love is a prison, a place of interrogation, a place where the party does not simply execute its enemies. It changes them. Inside, Winston discovers that O'Brien was never part of the resistance. He is a loyal servant of the party. Every gesture of sympathy was calculated. Every conversation was a trap. O'Brien begins Winston's re-education. He tortures him physically, but the physical pain is only the beginning. The true objective is to destroy Winston's confidence in his own mind. O'Brien tells him that reality does not exist independently. Reality is whatever the party says it is. Winston insists that some facts remain true even when no one accepts them. 2 objects plus 2 objects still make 4. The party cannot change that. O'Brien's response is terrifying. The party does not merely want Winston to repeat an incorrect answer. It wants him to see the incorrect answer as true. This is the deepest horror of 1984. A dictatorship is not satisfied when you remain silent. It is not satisfied when you obey. It wants control over the internal process by which you decide what is real. Winston is beaten, starved, humiliated, and mentally broken. He tries to preserve one final territory inside himself, his love for Julia. He believes the party may force him to say anything, but it cannot change what he truly feels. Then he is taken to Room 101. Room 101 contains the worst thing in the world. Not one universal form of torture, but a punishment specifically designed for each prisoner. For Winston, it is rats. He has an overwhelming terror of them. A cage containing starving rats is placed near his face. At that moment, Winston's resistance disappears. He does not merely ask for the torture to stop. He begs O'Brien to do it to Julia instead. This is the final victory of the party. Winston does not betray Julia by revealing information. He betrays her emotionally. He chooses her suffering over his own. The one relationship that gave him a private identity is destroyed. Later, Winston and Julia meet again. Both have survived, but neither is the same. They admit that they betrayed each other. The love between them is gone. The party has succeeded in entering the one place Winston believed it could never reach. Eventually, Winston sits alone in a cafe. He drinks gin. He listens to military news. He looks at the image of Big Brother, and he feels love. Not forced love, not words spoken to avoid punishment. The transformation is complete. Winston loves Big Brother. That ending is one of the bleakest conclusions in modern literature. The hero does not escape. The government does not fall. The resistance does not arrive. Winston does not die protecting his beliefs. Instead, his beliefs are removed from him. The party does not merely defeat the man. It rebuilds him into someone who accepts his own defeat. And this is where 1984 becomes more than a political story. It becomes a psychological one. The party controls society through three main weapons: fear, isolation, and uncertainty. Fear is the most obvious. People obey because they can be arrested, tortured, or erased. But fear alone is not enough to explain the party's power. People can sometimes resist fear when they have strong relationships. That is why isolation is essential. The party weakens families. It turns children against parents. It removes trust from friendships. It treats romantic love as dangerous. A person who is completely alone has no one to confirm his memories, no one to say, "I saw it too," no one to remind him that he is not insane. When people are separated from one another, the government becomes the only remaining source of reality. Then comes uncertainty. The party constantly changes the past. It claims that previous statements were never made. It forces people to hold two contradictory ideas at the same time. This mental discipline is known as doublethink. Doublethink is not ordinary hypocrisy. A hypocrite knows that he is lying. A person practicing doublethink learns to believe the lie while also forgetting that it was ever a lie. The citizen must remember whatever the party needs and erase that memory whenever it becomes inconvenient. This creates a population that cannot build a stable understanding of the world. And without a stable understanding of the world, organized resistance becomes almost impossible. You cannot oppose a system if you cannot confidently describe what the system did yesterday. Language is another weapon. The party creates a simplified language called Newspeak. Each new version contains fewer words. The goal is not to improve communication. The goal is to make certain thoughts impossible. If words such as freedom, justice, rebellion, and individuality disappear, future generations may lose the ability to clearly imagine those ideas. Orwell understood something crucial. Language does not merely describe thought. It helps shape thought. When language becomes smaller, political imagination becomes smaller with it. This is why controlling words can be more powerful than banning books. A banned book still exists somewhere. A forbidden word can survive in memory. But when a concept can no longer be clearly expressed, it becomes much harder to defend. The party also controls people by giving them an enemy. Citizens participate in daily rituals of hatred. They scream at images of traitors. They direct all frustration toward Goldstein, foreign nations, or invisible conspirators. This prevents them from asking why their own lives are miserable. Anger is not eliminated, it is redirected. The party understands that a frightened and exhausted population still needs emotional release, so it gives people permission to hate, as long as they hate the correct target. But perhaps the most disturbing idea in 1984 is that the party is not pretending to serve humanity. O'Brien does not claim that torture is necessary for peace. He does not claim that oppression will eventually create equality. He openly admits that the party wants power for its own sake. This makes the regime more terrifying than a government that simply becomes corrupt. Corruption suggests failure. The party's cruelty is not a failure of the system. It is the system functioning exactly as intended. Orwell also refuses to make Winston a traditional hero. Winston is weak, he is frightened, he makes mistakes, he trusts the wrong people, and in the end, he breaks. But this weakness is what makes him human. Most people like to imagine that they would resist a dictatorship, that they would remain brave, that they would never betray someone they loved. Asks a much less comfortable question. How much pain would it take before your principles disappeared? The novel does not mock Winston for failing. It shows us that a system with enough control can discover the exact pressure required to break almost anyone, and that may be the final warning of 1984. Freedom is not lost only when soldiers enter the streets. It can disappear gradually, when people stop caring whether information is true, when political loyalty becomes more important than evidence, when surveillance is accepted because innocent people supposedly have nothing to hide, when language is reduced to slogans, when citizens begin to fear one another more than they fear the institutions watching them, and when every uncomfortable fact can be dismissed, edited, or replaced. The world of 1984 is extreme, but its individual mechanisms are not imaginary. Propaganda exists, mass surveillance exists, historical revision exists, political language is manipulated, fear is used to divide populations, and people can be persuaded to deny what they have seen with their own eyes. The lesson is not that every government is the party. The lesson is that no society is automatically protected from becoming more like it. Truth survives only when people are willing to defend it. Privacy survives only when people understand its value before it disappears. Language survives only when we refuse to let complex ideas be replaced by empty slogans. And freedom survives only when individuals can think, remember, question, and speak without asking permission. Winston Smith believed that freedom began with the ability to recognize an obvious fact. But the party understood that its greatest victory would come when obvious facts no longer mattered. That is why the most frightening part of the 1984 is not Big Brother's ability to watch everyone. It is his ability to make people doubt their own minds. Because once a government controls your actions, you may still secretly oppose it. Once it controls your words, you may still remain free inside. But when it controls what you believe to be true, there may be no one left to resist, not even within yourself.